My name is Rainer Braun. I'm the Executive Director of the International Peace Bureau and one of the founding members of Nuke Free Europe. And I will try to lead you through this event. The key point of these events are two. First of all, to inform of all the events which happened over the autumn, or the first actions of our new network, News for Europe. And second is to have a look in the future. What are the next big events? What should we do? What are the main political positions we have to take? And this will be the second part of it. We send out to you an agenda, and I will try to lead you through the agenda. The first point is because we had quite a lot of questions to the work of the International Trade Unions Confederation against nuclear weapons and for peace. So we asked the Deputy Secretary of ITUC, Owen Tudor, who is also a member of our steering group, to inform the Confederation related to peace and disarmament. And this is our first point. I love to welcome Owen, and we'll give the floor to him. Owen, the floor is to you. Please present your ideas and thoughts.
Hey, thanks very much indeed, Rainer. And I'm very pleased to be able to represent the international trade union movement, but also, and I'll explain this in a moment, the Pan-European Regional Council of the International Trade Union Confederation. Globally, for those people who don't know us, we're an organization of 200 million trade union members in 163 countries and territories around the world. Although, as I sometimes explain to people, if we were a country of our own with those 200 million members, we would be one of the 10th largest countries on the planet. We also have, among that 200 million, about 50 to 60 million trade unionists in what we call our Pan-European region, which runs from Portugal on the Atlantic all the way over to Vladivostok on the Northern Pacific. So we are an organization that truly covers the whole of Europe, and that's obviously important for our involvement in the Nuke Free Europe campaign, because we bring together trade unionists in NATO member states, but also trade unionists outside of the NATO region. Because we're a trade union movement, we are solidly in favor of peace and against nuclear weapons, but we're not a political organization in quite that sense. We obviously have quite a lot of politics, but we're not a political organization in terms of who joins. If you are a person who works for a living, then you are the sort of person we want to be involved. And what that does mean is that we have people both who work in the weapons industry, in the nuclear weapons industry, as well as a lot of people who are working against those industries. And that means that we have what can sometimes be a broader interest in these issues than the peace movement per se. Broader doesn't necessarily mean it's an advantage, but it does mean that we represent more than just people who believe in the peace movement, and we have to take note of their concerns, as I'll come on to. But obviously, the main interest of workers around the world is what impact the weapons industry and nuclear weapons have on working people. At global level, our work on peace is very often led by our Japanese trade union movement, Rengo, who are, of course, the only trade union movement in the world who come from a country that's actually had nuclear nuclear weapons dropped on it. We do also have other trade unions coming from countries where nuclear weapons have been tested, but not in quite such a destructive sense. But, you know, we have workers in Australia, we have workers in the Pacific, we have workers in the US who have direct experience of the nuclear weapons industry. Our fundamental approach to peace is that we believe there can be no peace without social justice, and we believe that there can be no social justice without peace. So it's absolutely clear for many of our members around the world that war and conflict impacts very directly and very adversely on working people. Very often it is their jobs that are the first casualties of war, and their livelihoods as well. And we are one of the tripartite members of the International Labour Organization, established in 1919 as part of the Versailles Peace Treaty, and the very first line of the ILO Constitution, coming out of a Labour committee that was chaired by the American trade union leader Samuel Gompers, is in particular drawing attention to the fact that you can't have social justice without peace, and you can't have peace without social justice. So we're in favor of both, and they are integrally connected. In terms of what we're arguing for at the moment, there are a number of issues where our interests intersect with those of the peace movement. We are concerned about the level of tension in the world. I mean, I should say, to start off with, we are concerned about the potentially existential threat to humanity posed by nuclear weapons were they ever deployed in a military conflict. It's clear you can't win a nuclear war, you can only lose a nuclear war. But we are particularly concerned also about the level of tension that exists in the world at the moment, and the part that nuclear weapons play in that process in dividing people. We believe in collective security and in human security, not in the political security that poses one country against another or one government against another. We believe fundamentally as trade unionists that negotiation is the best way to resolve differences and to diffuse tensions rather than pouring fuel on the fire. We also have a particular concern, which is how much money is spent on nuclear weapons and on weapons generally. And if you look at the most recent data published earlier this year by SIPRI in Stockholm, you will see that spending on weapons generally went up by 2.6% in the previous year. If just that increase in weapons spending had been devoted to, for instance, social protection, the payment of benefits, the safety net that supports people facing problems in their lives, we would have been able to establish a global fund for social protection, one of our objectives, which would provide social protection to the world's poorest people. And if we just spent 3.9% of the amount spent on weaponry the year before last, then you would be able to provide social protection for the entire population of the world that isn't currently covered by social protection. So we look at the money that is spent on weapons, but in particular nuclear weapons. So it's trillions on weapons and billions on nuclear weapons. We would prefer that to be spent on socially useful goods, and partly deriving from that, whilst we don't want to see people losing their jobs as a result of divesting from nuclear weapons. What we do want to see is we want to see a just conversion of those jobs, so that the people who are currently devoting their lives, deriving their livelihoods and applying their skills to nuclear weapons and weapons generally, we would prefer to see those reoriented so that people were, for example, putting more of their skills and labour to good use in healthcare, in, for instance, tackling the causes and the outcomes of things like the COVID-19 pandemic, and also in particular dealing with the third existential threat. You've got nuclear weapons, you've got pandemics, and then you've got climate change. We would prefer to see the skills of people who are currently involved in the nuclear weapons industry devoted to resolving the climate crisis and making sure that we are better able to survive that existential threat. Partly as a result of all of that, the International Trade Union Confederation is now working with the International Peace Bureau and the Olof Palme International Center in Sweden to run an initiative called Common Security 2022, because we're engaged in that initiative, and we hope that by next May we will be able to publish a new report putting back on the global agenda the ideas of common security that were originally floated by Olof Palme, then the Swedish Prime Minister, 40 years ago in his groundbreaking report. The world has moved on since then. We've seen a growth in international tensions. We've also seen the movement of those international tensions from being primarily at European level to being global level, with a massive development of the multipolar world. We want to see that idea of common security, which again, as I say, goes back to the ideas of negotiation rather than conflict as the way of resolving problems. But we also, therefore, practically over the next 6 months, we want to see the NPT review process moved forward in January in New York, and in particular, we're concentrating on increasing the number of signatories, ratifications for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons ahead of the first conference of the parties of that treaty in Vienna in March, and we will be mobilizing a trade union delegation to take part in that process. There are a lot of other things that we're doing, both peace-related around the world, in terms, for instance, of promoting the peace processes in Colombia, in Somalia and the Horn of Africa, in other parts of the world that we're involved in. And there is lots of other activity that trade unions are involved in to promote a just conversion, to more effectively use the money that's currently spent on nuclear weapons and also diffuse the tensions. And we want to promote among our members those ideas rather than the fallacious suggestion that the nuclear umbrella provides you any protection. So there is a lot more going on, but I've spoken for far too long already. So Rainer, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen, for this impressive and highly interesting overview about your work and how it is related to the work of our campaign. And I think you are really a very, very important partner of the work. And I'm personally very happy that you are really a member, an active member of the steering committee, and also an active member of the IPB World Conference in Barcelona. Now there is a chance to ask questions to Owen. Please, is there someone who wants to raise his or her hand? I think we are a small group. I hope I can see everyone. If someone wants to raise a question to Owen, the floor is to him or her. There was a question from Carol. Carol, the floor is to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Because
yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you, but this doesn't matter.
Okay, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me either. I'm here representing CND. I'm calling from Britain. Thank you, Owen. I appreciate that what you say and what you put forward is constrained by the fact that you represent a coalition of organisations. That's not necessarily an easy thing. However, even within that, I still think that some of what's been said is over-egging the trade union pudding, if I can put it like that. If you look at Britain, there are a number of formal commitments from trade unions to oppose nuclear weapons, support the NPT, support the TPNW, and so forth. But not only is there no action on that, but the TUC in the last Congress this summer took backward steps in relation to climate change and defence diversification. The Labour Party affiliated trade unions in Britain remain silent in their majority on the issue of Britain's nuclear weapons. And honestly, this is simply not good enough for trade unions to say, oh, we're with you, but. It's not simply a matter that you're forced to work at the slowest, the speed of your slowest member or most reluctant member, but it's also a matter of the degree to which trade union organisations are prepared to campaign amongst their own membership to promote the issue of nuclear disarmament, to promote support for it. So what I would welcome hearing from you, if you're able, is something a little bit more specific about what the two organisations you mentioned are doing positively to encourage trade unionists in Europe to put forward a more self-active and anti-nuclear positions and to work for them and to campaign for them. Thank you, Rainer. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for the question and the comment. And I think there is no further question. Owen, you have the floor.
Okay, so I don't want to make this just a British experience. Obviously, I worked for many years for the TUC, but I am now speaking on behalf of the global organisation. As I said earlier, I mean, trade unions do represent people on all sides of this issue, and we have to therefore recognise that and deal with that as an issue. And as you implied in your question, Carol, politics also remains a problem, and we have varying approaches from trade union movements in countries where which are nuclear weapons countries. They have a different experience from other countries where it can sometimes be a politically easier issue to address. But I think it's probably fair to say that we are absolutely not at the International Trade Union Confederation moving at the pace of our slowest members. I think you were directing that more at the TUC than the ITUC, because we do indeed advocate very strongly for a non-nuclear weapons-based approach. I think it is, however, worth noting, and we do always try to make sure that people are aware of this. And this, to be honest, goes similarly to issues around climate change as well. It is very often extremely difficult persuading workers that the idea of either just transition or just conversion is actually going to provide them with the protection which they seek and which they expect rightly from their trade union movement. Because what we've got to do is we've got to hold out a realistic prospect that their wages, their jobs, their skills will be protected, rather than simply expressing it as an aspiration. And so the challenge for trade unions, with our explicitly anti-nuclear approach at global level, is to persuade our members that they actually have a realistic prospect of not being left behind if we go down this route. And I'm not going to say that's easy. I mean, that is difficult. You are going to have to deal with some extremely skeptical people in that regard. I would say that there are examples of countries where we have managed that distinction. COSATU in South Africa, for instance, were a key part of the tripartite coalition with the ANC and the South African Communist Party that abandoned or divested from nuclear weapons in South Africa in the 1990s. So it's not unique. And obviously some of our trade union organizations in former Soviet republics were also involved, probably not as much as COSATU, I don't want to overclaim, but they were also involved in their giving up of nuclear weapons. And it is, for instance, in Europe, our Irish affiliates and our Austrian affiliates who are very often at the forefront of the call for a non-nuclear approach. In Sweden, for instance, I know our trade union movement, the largest trade union movement in Sweden, LO Sweden, is pushing strongly with the socialists, social democrats in Sweden, to try and get them to adopt a more anti-nuclear approach. It varies from country to country where the unions are. In some of the nuclear sharing countries like Germany and Italy and France, I suppose France isn't a nuclear sharing country. In those countries, the trade union movements are more active and more vocal on these issues. So the simple answer, I don't want to be accused of just waffling to try and excuse our position, is that it's not easy, and it needs to be done carefully and cautiously to try and bring trade union movements towards a position which is more in line with that of the global trade union movement, where they aren't currently, and we will continue to work on that.
So there's one more question by Angelika.
This is more or less a remark. I'm coming from Germany, IPPNW Germany, and also I'm in the ICANN network. And here we have a lot of difficulties, even though we are maybe a little bit more on the road with to get the trade union members active. It's really a very hard work. But maybe if we all could put together some best practice, not experiments, Beispiele,
Examples.
Because I think that it must be started locally, regionally, and nationally. That peace movements, peace groups, and trade unions work together. Also, climate activists, and we should try to look on the positive examples and best practice examples. Maybe we can learn from that. And if there are good examples from Sweden or from Italy, we should ask them how did that work. And maybe, Owen, you could go forward on this.
Owen, maybe 3 minutes for your final comments, and then we jump to the next point.
Well, I agree with Angelika. I think that's absolutely the correct approach to take. I know that Carol and the CND colleagues in the UK have indeed been trying to do that, and we need to continue doing it. As I say, it's not easy, but it is absolutely vital and absolutely valuable to make those differences. I mean, this is always one of the challenges in any political movement is not how do you persuade people who agree with you. It's how do you persuade people who disagree with you, because that's when you unlock unlock victory and unlock success in these issues. So a lot of it is really hard work, and there aren't any easy answers to it, but Angelika's come closest to explaining how you actually do it, and she's right, I think.
So thank you, Owen. And you know, Owen, that you are with us. This is also a step of this big progress of the last years. So I think we are on a quite good way. And now we know that we have to overcome the obstacles and see that we really get more engagement also of members of the trade unions. This is the challenge of the next years. And let's go the way. Okay, the next point is, and I'm happy to welcome Tom and also to congratulate him to being the new chair of the campaign for nuclear disarmament in Great Britain. And Owen has the big challenge to summarize a little bit the actual developments on the nuclear weapons fields. I think he will start with the NATO summit and the last NATO summit last week in Brussels. And I can only say the horrible announcement which were made at this summit, but the floor is to you, Tom. Please, where we are and what we should do to overcome the very difficult situation.
Thanks. Thank you, Rainer. I'm dealing still dealing with a post-Barcelona cough. And I should also say that at any moment I may well be joined by a small person that wants to sit on my lap. So if you see what I think is a very cute 22-month-old, you can tune into him and his beautiful face rather than what I'm going to say. I will touch on NATO briefly, but I'll work in broader brushstrokes than that. I think the specifics of that meeting. So where are we in terms of achieving nuclear abolition? I mean, is it even possible to make a definite and precise claim about this? I think it's quite difficult to do that. It might be more useful, therefore, to start by looking at the current state of nuclear risks, something that Owen referred to. And by referring to the current state of nuclear risks, we can use that as a way of providing context for later comments and for the challenges that we face. So if we're going to look at the nature of current nuclear risks, I think we need to look at the current state of play in the United States and the Allied powers. Here he comes, he's heard my voice, so he's arrived. So I suspect that there's consensus that nobody in the last generation did more to highlight the risks posed by nuclear weapons than former US President Donald Trump. It wasn't just that Trump spoke about nuclear weapons so much. This is a long-standing obsession for him. There were videos of him from the 80s going on about nuclear weapons. So it's not just that he spoke about nuclear weapons so much, or that his nuclear posture review clearly defined such weapons as possible war-fighting devices. It wasn't just that Trump trashed non-proliferation, arms control, and similar treaties. There was a bonfire of the treaties under his administration. It's not just that he disorganized what previously stood as a relatively stable and predictable nuclear order. It wasn't just that his administration spoke of usable nuclear weapons and moved the US military-industrial complex into a new arms race footing. It wasn't even the widespread perception of his political unpredictability that ramped up tension so dramatically, though it surely didn't help. The actual scale of Trump's impact on nuclear questions is illustrated by the fact that his own military thought he was capable of ordering a nuclear attack on China in the aftermath of his electoral defeat. General Mark Milley, chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, was so concerned at the prospect that he telephoned his Chinese counterpart, General Li Zhusheng, not once, but twice, to assure him that the military would not allow Trump to launch a nuclear assault. All the details of these telephone calls are contained in Bob Woodward's book, Peril. Can you imagine that situation? The chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff phoning his Chinese counterpart to reassure him that the US wasn't about to launch a nuclear strike. General Milley seemed certain that Trump could be contained in the event of such an order. He seemed to think that such an order was a distinct possibility. But what would have happened if such an order was given? Would the imperial presidency really have gone quietly into the night, thwarted by a general or two? Nothing seems certain as far as I'm concerned. So Trump is no longer in office, and as such, tensions have most certainly been reduced from this high point. But they have not gone away. There was some hope that a Biden presidency would open a new era of nuclear diplomacy, risk reduction, and progress on disarmament. Nobody thinks about to push the button, of course, but while some had hoped that his nuclear posture review, which is in the stages of being drafted, which is expected next year, while some of us hoped that this might open the way to a new, more rational era of policy, such hopes have really been dashed by the removal of Lenora Temero from the process. She was fired. She was an expert in non-proliferation and arms control. Temero was seen as somebody who was committed to undoing the damage of recent years and equally committed to taking a serious look at questions around sole use, no first use, and related questions. What should we now expect from Biden's nuclear posture review? His attitude towards and support for the modernization of US nuclear weapons, in fact, not just modernization, but a whole new generation of such weapons. His failure to restart US participation in the Iran deal or JCPOA, the continued ratcheting of tensions with China and Russia. None of this looks promising. Even the 11th hour US agreement to accept Russia's offer of extending New START for 5 years, a welcome move, was soured by Secretary of State Antony Blinken's comments, which portrayed New START in terms of restricting Russian strategic weapons and called for China to be forced into the bilateral treaty. Blinken failed to mention the US's own strategic nuclear forces at all. So the departure of Trump has allowed for the US, under Biden's leadership, to enthusiastically re-engage with NATO, to assert US commitment to the alliance, and to move ahead with expanding NATO's activities well beyond the Atlantic region. And then we have AUKUS, a trilateral agreement between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US, which not only tramples over the Non-Proliferation Treaty with respect to supplying nuclear power technology for non-peaceful purposes, but which heralds an Anglophone military pact in the South Pacific, with nuclear issues at the heart of it. CND in the UK has been working on this question, and Carol herself, who spoke earlier, did sterling work at the most recent Labour Party conference to put this issue on the agenda. And it's worth noting, within the context of the earlier discussion we had, that more than 70%, I think it was 77%, although Carol can correct me, 77% of affiliated trade unions to the Labour Party backed CND's, or the CND-backed motion, which was critical of AUKUS. Trade unions in Australia have been similarly critical. British parliamentarians are raising the issue in what's called an early day motion in the UK to make sure that there's a proper, full and thorough discussion of the whole AUKUS issue. So of course, the junior nuclear power in the AUKUS triumvirate, the UK, has breached the NPT already. It's breached it all on its own with the announcement that it will increase the upper threshold of its nuclear warhead stockpile against the long-term trend and commitment to overall reductions. And again, this is something that CND has been incredibly active on over the past few months. We're in the process of preparing to officially or formally report the United Kingdom to the United Nations, the President to the United Nations, and to the President of the upcoming review conference for this breach. So the question is, what did Biden and his administration make of the UK's integrated review? Given everything we know about the close connections between the UK and the US and their nuclear capabilities, we should assume that its content and direction were wholly endorsed by US policymakers and military leaders. All of which paints a pretty troubling picture. But this is no surprise if we're perfectly honest. If the risks posed by nuclear weapons were untroubling, we wouldn't be in this meeting. We wouldn't need meetings like this. We wouldn't need organizations of the sort that we represent and are members of. And we wouldn't need transnational organizational efforts like Nuke Free Europe. So let's turn our attention towards the pressing organizational and action opportunities that exist in Europe. We've had a successful month of action where peace and disarmament organizations in Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Italy, France, England, and Scotland mounted activities to highlight the presence of nuclear weapons, to call for an end to nuclear sharing, and to end the arms race, and for states to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Such joint activity is a big step forward, and we should do everything we can in our future discussions, in our consideration of future action, to make sure that we sustain this joint level of action. Coming up next week is the COP26 Climate Change Conference in Scotland, which will see thousands of activists gathering alongside the conference, where they'll be discussing and planning to meet the challenge posed by impending climate catastrophe. It's been said that those of us in the peace and anti-nuclear movements see a situation where humanity is faced with two existential threats. There could be three if we had the threat of pandemics. Climate change and its consequences could become fatal within a generation, and the nuclear threat, which could become fatal next year, maybe, or next month, perhaps, or maybe later this evening. Alertness to one of these risks surely opens the door to alertness to both. We should think carefully about building upon work already underway across these issues. Perhaps Nuke-Free Europe could send a message to those demonstrating at COP, spelling out the connections between our issues, the issues of nuclear disarmament and nuclear threats, and the issues posed by the prospect of climate catastrophe. CMD will be there in Glasgow and at other events in Scotland. I know Angelica, who's on the call, will be travelling from Germany to Glasgow. We need to make sure that our message and our understanding and appreciation of the interconnectedness and the reality of these dual threats is communicated to everybody participating in COP. Then there's the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the signal biggest boost, I think, that the nuclear disarmament movement's had for some time. Support for the treaty grows, and as we come to understand all of the opportunities presented by the text, new opportunities for action develop. The recent decision by Norway to attend the state parties meeting in Vienna in March next year opens the prospect of other NATO member states doing likewise. Or does it? People will probably have seen NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg's comments that the Norwegian government will have to explain itself to NATO. Norway, after all, is a NATO member state. But perhaps Stoltenberg, himself a former Norwegian Prime Minister, should perhaps concentrate on explaining himself to the Norwegian people, the majority of whom stand in opposition to nuclear weapons. NATO's reaction to the Norwegian decision demonstrated the enduring issues with that organisation with respect to prospects for nuclear disarmament. For the peace movement, Vienna raises the prospect of joint action and joint activity. We should surely try to meet in Vienna as an organisation or alongside others. But can we actually do more? What parts of the TPNW might offer us opportunities for concrete action? One possibility is around the question of nuclear testing. The TPNW itself commits signatories to seek redress for the legacies of nuclear testing. In the UK,
Sorry,
just
the
last
side
weekend,
noise is so loud, I barely can understand something.
Okay, I'll try and slow it down, and I'll try and have the baby on my lap.
Scratching a lot on the
things
floor
around.
somewhere.
Okay, so nuclear testing and the legacies of nuclear testing could be important questions for us to try and raise in Vienna. So, for example, at the weekend in the UK, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament had the second day of its conference, where we heard from organisations related to nuclear test veterans, nuclear test communities, those who have been impacted by nuclear testing over a prolonged period of time. The situation in the UK is slightly different from the rest of Europe, and I'll come on to that question in a minute. But what about the question of French nuclear tests in Algeria? You know, there is an enduring injustice here, not only in terms of the fact that the French military and French government actually tested their nuclear weapons in mainland Algeria, but the fact of the matter is that the French government has not been very forthcoming in revealing where it's buried the nuclear materials which resulted from this test. You know, Ireland and Austria are TPNW ratifying states. Can work be coordinated within the European Union or the European Parliament alongside Ireland and Austria to support Algeria's claims for redress? I suspect there's an opening. And if we're able to exploit that opening, we will have a situation where the peace movements interacting at state level can move forward in terms of these particular political questions. But what about the US nuclear weapons based in Germany, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands? All of these weapons will be based on designs that have been tested somewhere at some time. Where were they tested? What damage was done? What are the legacies of harm? What redress is there that needs to be made? What demands might be possible within the context of the TPNW state parties meeting in Vienna, and a combination of that with the coordinated work of the European peace movements? So there are many opportunities, just as there are many challenges, but there are opportunities within a state level framework embodied in the TPNW that we really need to think carefully about in terms of how we exploit, how we use it to promote our issues, and how we might, just might, make some actual enshrined progress on the questions that we've all addressed here. So I'm terribly sorry if people couldn't hear everything I said. I've got a very lively 22-month-old who was playing on the floor, but hopefully some of that made some sense and gave us some idea of what challenges we face and what opportunities present themselves to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you both of you for making this common presentation. And I think he will be a big, big peace fighter, learning so early about all the challenges we have to facing, and thanks a lot. So the floor is open for questions. Maybe we postpone the questions which are directly connected to the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to the point 6, where we're discussing about the actions in Vienna, but the floor is open to comments and general impressions about what Tom was saying. So again, I'm looking if there. Tom, you were so convincing that I cannot see any hand. Oh yeah, Carol again. Carol.
And also Angelika actually raised her hand.
Okay, so first Carol and then Angelika.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not intending to hog the discussion, but I wanted to raise a specific point, which is about AUKUS, and ask people to share any knowledge or information they have. We've probably all had the experience that we had in Britain, which is that when Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, introduced the AUKUS Pact into Parliament, he described it as a triumph, a landmark partnership, something which would promote stability in the Indo-Pacific region. And I imagine all of us on this call recognise that that's a bit of George Orwell doublethink. In fact, it will do the opposite. In CND, we're particularly concerned about the nuclear submarines and what that means. Of course, you would expect that. But it's also the case that we're beginning to find out that the treaty covers a lot of other things, and this is what I want to invite people to share information on. That it covers, for instance, cyber work. It covers deep sea elements. It covers other aspects of intelligence. Underwater capabilities, long-range strike capabilities, and so on. Like any final point to this, like any military treaty, it's only semi-public. They very rarely publish in detail the terms, and I've not found it particularly easy to follow up on the detailed aspects of what it is covering. And if anyone here has information on that, I would be really grateful if they would share it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Carol. I will come back to this with some ideas from my side after Angelika. Angelika, the floor is to you.
Yes, Tom, I saw that you have made good notes for your speech, and I didn't understand everything. Maybe you can send around your notes, because as I understood, there were in a lot of details. I didn't hear about it yet from the United States and British nuclear policy.
So we will include the minutes of this meeting. We will include Tom's speech. I'm sure that you have it online, so we can use it. And for Carol, on the IPB website, you can find the video of a webinar we were organizing together with the Asian European Pacific Forum, I think 3 weeks ago, about AUKUS. And this, I think, collect all the important information, because we had Australia, New Zealand, other Asian speakers there, which were giving a tremendously overview about the nuclear dimension of this, and also about the consequences for the foreign policy in New Zealand and the consequences for the Asian security policy. I think this is really a big amount of information which could be very helpful to get an overview about all the AUKUS consequences. Okay, when there's no further comments, I jump to our actions, which are, I think, Tom mentioned it. Tom mentioned the success of our September activities, the first common activities in Europe against the European nuclear weapons, or the US weapons in Europe. So let's try to get a short summary, and always, I think, in all the short information about the event should become a part for outcome and what are the future activities. I will go along the historical days, and the first event was Büchel. Büchel was on the 5th of September, and I'm very happy that we can welcome Marion. I think, Marion, you are still in the States, but it's great that you could join us. Marion, the floor is to you.
Okay. Can I say more than about the human chain, or is it just limited to it?
It is up to you, but you have limited time to speak.
Yeah. And this is how much?
Not more than 10 minutes, please.
Okay, great. Okay, so actually, we are facing in Germany that we try to have a huge campaign against the nuclear upraising, nuclear sharing, which is actually what, yeah, we are all affected by Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, and Turkey. So this month of action was really important for us. In Büchel, on the 5th of September, this was 3 weeks before our German-wide government election, we had a human chain with 800 people at the base. They were coming from with buses from 10 different cities, and yeah, and this human chain was organized by our German-wide campaign, which contains of more than 70 organizations. So that's our advantage we are having in Germany, that we have this huge campaign. There is a live stream. What was really great during the chain was that also Nuke for Europe had a great possibility to present our goals. Angelika Clausen was speaking. Then somebody from, oh, what's his name? Sorry, I'm so bad with names. From the Netherlands. Guido, right. Guido was speaking, and Ludo from Belgium was speaking. So that's what the people really liked, that they got a European perspective, that they understood that in the future we have to work much better together. And after that, we continued actually saying we need a bike tour, which started in actually for us in Germany in Aachen on the 24th of September. There was a climate strike from Fridays for Future, where we actually made the connection between climate and military, which we believe is something we have to add in our campaign as well in a stronger way. This was also a topic during the human chain again and again, and went from there with a group of 10 people from Germany to Focal, to the Netherlands. And it was great actually by bike to learn about what's the situation in the Netherlands right now. I mean, for example, the new nuclear uprising, the new B-61-12 bomb, which is planned, contains the whole infrastructure of all these bases being worked on in all these countries. But the Netherlands were the only ones, they still have the old tiny fence compared to Germany and Belgium. And yeah, Ludo probably gonna talk more about what's going on in Kleine Brogel. But then finally on the 26th, when there was the action in Kleine Brogel, was also our election day in Germany, which was in a way, yeah, not such a success for the German left during this election. But we probably gonna get an ample coalition, that's how we call it. And we have our government now promised that they, for the state conference in Vienna, that for the first time now they send somebody for observation. So that's the minimum we could reach. But besides that, we are still struggling a lot for more. The civil resistance in Germany in general is very strong. For example, our city appeal, where the cities want our government to sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, are 137 cities right now. And we still have 646 parliamentarians who also want our government to sign the treaty. So, but besides that, learning from the different bases, we also had international guests, and it got really close. It was not just September, it was also October, where, for example, Steadfast Noon, which is a NATO exercise, a nuclear exercise actually started, where in Nörvenich was for the first time a big protest of 150 to 200 people in Germany, where again we had Ludo talking, and we had Rainer Braun talking, and so on. So also there, the European perspective was very well heard and addressed. And on the 20th of October, there was a go-in action actually at Focal by also an international team from somebody from the US, from the Dutch Catholic workers, and also from Germany. And this has to do that in Germany, there are basically two main focuses. So one thing is the lobby work we are doing with the city appeal, with the parliamentarians and so on. But the other thing is that since a few years, we are having again a lot of people participating again and again into go-in actions, because they want to address, they want to uphold international law. We work really close together with IALANA, the International Lawyers Organization Against Nuclear War, because this whole nuclear sharing in NATO is illegal. And so we have a right actually to do these actions. And this is going so well right now, because our German government actually, they are saying that they need to hold up or keep nuclear sharing, because this would give them a say in the nuclear planning group actually to be able to prevent a nuclear war in Europe. And we could prove that this is totally not the case. Any NATO country can be part in Europe in the nuclear planning group, and we have no decision in that. So in between, we are all the time having also trials. For example, on September 29th, we had the trial from Susan Crane from the United States, who was also at our actions in Kleine Brogel and Focal and Büchel and so on, for her go-in actions in Büchel. And we're having many more. And just right now is also the situation that for the first time, I'm gonna have the ability to bring my lawsuit complaint to the European Court of Human Rights, which the date is the 8th of November. So that's what I'm working on right now. And there's so much new success in each individual trial where all these groups are working together on now, which we hope that if we can make a change, that's going to be great. And when we combine it with the action in Holland, actually, if we have success somehow in Germany and also in the Netherlands, people are going through these trials and holding up international law. We hopefully bring also here our topic a bit further. Yeah, so that's my part.
Thank you, Mario, and above all, to combine our actions with all the activities in Germany, with the trial activities, and hopefully at the end we will have more success than in the past, but I think we are really in a very, very good, active way. So I would like to give the floor now to Ludo, and I would like to ask Ludo not only to speak about kind of work, but also about Völker, that we have all the two other nuclear sharing military bases together. Ludo, the floor is.
Thank you. Well, in Belgium, we had, well, according to our expectations, a quite successful and colorful what we called Bikes Not Bombs action on Sunday, the 26th of September, which is a symbolic day because it's the International Day for the Abolition of Nuclear Arms. We had 150 activists cycling from Hasselt, which is a city 30 kilometers away from the airbase in Kleine Brogel, where the nuclear bombs are based or deployed. So it was a tour of 30 kilometers. And at the airbase, we had about 250 people or activists that held a rally and made also human chain at the fence of the military airbase. And as Marion said, among them were also a number of peace activists from Germany that came down from also from Volkel, where the day before there was an action in the airbase in Volkel in the Netherlands, and also from the Netherlands and the US. So I think this was a first, let's say, a first step in my idea of working together on a European level, in having a common European actions in most of the nuclear sharing countries, and as well as in the European nuclear states. Tom didn't talk about it, but there was also in the UK and as well as in France, there were actions in the same period. So I think this was quite important. Maybe a small word about Volkel. I saw that Harry is also here. He could also talk about it, but Harry van Velzen. But there was also an action on the 25th, organized by a platform organizations, but under the lead of the SP. So it's a political party in the Netherlands, the Left Party, where there were like, I don't know, 60, 70 people at the action, and where we made a tour around the airbase in Volkel. There were some speeches as well, and attended also by people from Germany and from Belgium, and as well as Susan from the United States. So what I think was nice or a good thing is that we tried to symbolically connect them. There was the international cycle tour that was supposed to be much bigger and longer, but due to problems by the organizer who was sick, we couldn't make it as we intended to have it. But I think it was good first idea, first step also in connect those actions together and to publicize that together. So maybe another word about actions in Belgium. I think we also, because we are campaigning on several levels and as well on the local level. And so we have a tradition now since a few years to act also on the International Peace Day and to focus on nuclear arms on the Peace Day, the 21st of September. So it was a few days before. And we achieved to have this year, 132 mayors of cities and municipalities that urged the government to remove the nuclear bombs from Belgian territory and to sign the TPNW. And so we wait in what way now Belgium is serious about its own governmental declaration that has been made last year when the government was formed, and where it is said that Belgium, and I quote, will play a proactive role in the 2021, so it became the 2022 NPT. Says also, together with European NATO, will explore how to strengthen the multilateral non-proliferation framework and how the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons can give new impetus to multilateral nuclear disarmament. So this is what the government itself promised, and we still have not the information in which way they make their promise into practice. So finally, I don't know if this is now the time or it's more for discussion. I think reflection on the actions and what is important next year. We have next year a very important year. I think this is the NPT review conference in January. There's the first meeting of state parties in Vienna in March. And there is the NATO summit in June in Madrid. And I think we should make a tradition having actions around the 26th of September on the International Day for the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, or to make it a kind of week of or month actions as we did this year. And I think in concluding that we had actions with each time several hundred people participating in it. It's not the mass movement as we see with the climate movement, but I think we need to build coalitions. I always say that, but this is a challenge we face, because if you look at the public opinion polls, then we see that the public opinion is behind our cause with a big majority. And so our challenge is to translate it into mobilizations. I think these mobilizations to be on the streets are very important. I think also we need to have ICANN on board. I suggest that we would have a meeting with the steering committee or some members of it and the people from ICANN, in which way we can join forces to strengthen the peace movement on this issue in Europe. And then I think the challenge is also to have more presence in the media on the replacement, because when I well understood, these P61 12 bombs will be in production from November, according to the plan United States. And it means that from next year on, they will be deployed. But there is no discussion on it. There is no coverage on it. And so we need to convince the press on the importance of it. And alone already in a democratic state that we need to discuss this deployments, this new deployments of P61 12 bombs. And then, of course, we need, last but not least, to build better relations, I think, with politicians that support our campaign. And this will be discussed, I think, in a next point. A common statement of members of parliament in Europe and the US is only one example to express that relation. But also maybe to facilitate meetings and exchanges with members of parliaments from nuclear sharing countries and nuclear countries in general in Europe could be another one. When I'm not mistaken, but Rainer maybe can give more information on that, I think ICANN is trying to organize a meeting in Vienna the day before the meeting of state parties in that sense. So to have a meeting with parliamentarians from several parliaments in Europe. So I will leave it up to that.
Thank you, Ludo. I think we will come back to many of your points, but before we are coming to the discussion about our activities in September, I would love to give the floor to Julie. Julie was, from my understanding, making really a great job in the social media, promoting our social media activities. And I would like to ask Julie to give us a short overview about her activities and what she has done and what she suggests for our future activities. And then we have a general discussion about the past, but also looking to the future. Julie, thank you for all your work, and the floor is to you.
Thank you. Can you give me screen sharing rights so I can show the video? We've been talking about actions this month.
Julia
okay.
will do this. So
Done.
Yeah, that should be done.
Yeah. So 1 second. Here we go. Can you see my screen? Yeah?
Yeah, but up to now it's black.
So that's the last video that we made to kind of summarize what the network organized during the month of action, which worked really well online. I think videos have been quite successful. So I'm just gonna give an overview of where we came to in terms of social media reach since starting. So on Facebook, we've got 314 followers and our reach has been around 7,000 people in total, with peaks for videos. So that's something that worked really well. We have 62% of men and 38% of women, which is probably something that we could work on. And there's also quite a vast majority of older people. We don't have a lot of young people. So maybe that's something that's reflected in the peace movement. But that's something that we should probably work on, especially next year or in the coming year. Like you said, there's a lot of important landmarks coming up. And the last point in terms of the reach, I'm going to share this little graph with you all so you can see. This is the countries where we've had a reach. So I think we should all clap for Ludo because he's brought a lot of people from Belgium. We've had a good reach in the United Kingdom, Germany, Netherlands, and Taiwan for some reason. So I think what this shows is that we need to build our reach and our coalitions, not just kind of as an organization, but also in terms of who sees what we create and the sort of events that we organize, especially in other countries such as Italy, France. So I think that's just the takeaway points. I'm going to really keep it brief. And feel free to give me any feedback on the social media that you've seen. And yeah, I think that's it. Rainer, did you want me to say anything else?
It's up to you. What you want?
I think that's good for me.
Okay, thank you. Then Julie, thank you so much. And now I think I would like to open the floor and hopefully Alain will tell a little bit about France and whoever wants to speak and underline or oppose some of these, what was said. Yeah, it's more or less a reflection, but like Marion and also Ludo has done it, every reflection has also to do with future activities. So let's combine these 2 points. And then we jump to another point, which are the webinars, which we have done. And then at the end, we are coming to the final point, future activities, what we can have in mind. And maybe we can come to some agreements about our future activities. But first of all, the floor is open and I'm looking who is, Alain, I see your finger. Alain, the floor is to you.
Yes. Yes, you saw it in the little video. There was a lot of events, more or less important events in the action week between the 21st and 26th of September, although International Peace Day, and the day for the elimination of nuclear weapons. For the 21st September, we try to build a permanent coalition with climate activists, and we focused for the peace movement on the pollution by the armies and by the nuclear activities of our army and so on. And I think coalitions with climate activists, because there's a lot of young people in this demonstration of the climate activists. Actually, it's the discussion about the budget of our country, and we try to make pressure on the parliamentarians, but it's the end of this mandate, although it's not very easy. And we made also pressures at France, so that France participate as an observer at the Vienna conference. It's a possibility to speak about this treaty in the public opinion. I think I would like to know, perhaps you know that, you said Norway will come, but is it sure?
Yes.
And if the Belgian succeed, it would be very good. And I think it's also important that the EU will participate as observer. Have we information about the pressures of the European parliamentarians? Because there is a high representative of the EU for foreign affairs. I think they have to be observers. We have 3 countries of the EU which ratified the treaty, the TPNW treaty, and I think the EU foreign policy representative have to be there, I think. Okay, but if you have more information, I would like to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alain. And again, the floor is open for further comments. For this part, mainly about our activities in September, I think we should have in mind that these are really the first activities, bigger activities of our network after the webinars. So I think we could be quite happy with that. Ludo was underlining that we don't have a mass movement. That is definitely true. But we are, I think, on a good way for more the future. And let's discuss the future at the final point. Before we are coming to the point of future action, when there is no hand raised, I will give the floor to Angelika to inform us a little bit about the webinars, the next webinars, and maybe also about the letter to the parliamentarians. Angelika, the floor is to you.
Yes, as Marion pointed out before, our Nuke for Europe activities are on 2 arms, the action work on one side, and then the educational work on the other side with the webinars. And I organized 2 webinars. The first one with the movements, the Netherlands, Italy, and Germany, and the second one was parliamentarians from Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. It wasn't possible to find someone from Italy, though I worked very hard for this. And the second webinar with the parliamentarians was in this way successful that Guido Limput and his parliamentarian, his name is Jan van Jasko, so I don't quite remember. they want this parliamentarian, Netherlands Dutch parliamentarian wants to have an op-ed, a common op-ed with Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and we will have to organize that. And Jan Jasper formulated a text, but we couldn't start with the work because of the elections in Germany. It wasn't possible to ask anybody. Everybody was so busy with electional work. So this is a work we will have to do now. And then the next webinar we aim at is to get Eastern European countries parliamentarians in our educational in our educational work. This is quite hard so far. I don't have any names of, for instance, any parliamentarian in Poland or in Czechia, Slovenian, Serbia. Serbia is not EU, other Eastern European countries. I've got the email address of a Russian political referent who is telling the politics like the Russian government defends it and explains it, and he will. He is a person, a very important person in the German-Russian whatsoever. I don't quite know. Did remember the name of this institution, and he will talk at a webinar of the Protestant Church, the role of Russia in peace, which will take place in November. I can look for the dates and then send it around later, and also the name of this representative. He must be quite a good one, and maybe I will ask some friends to watch that webinar, because I will not be in Germany at that time. I will go to the COP26 and their work for the connection between the peace movement and the climate movement, and do some specific work there, and networking. And now, besides that, I also want to tell you that we had, I'm from IPPNW Germany, and I'm also the European president of IPPNW. And we had a very good web meeting of the European affiliates last week, and people from the other affiliates, especially from the Scandinavian affiliates, are very eager to do more joining together among the social democratic parties and among social democratic parliamentarians, and to push Germany and Belgium that both of them join the meeting in Vienna next year in March. So I was very happy to feel that quite a few affiliates of IPPNW got engaged and want to do more, and want to really become quite active. And the second thing I want to share here with you is that I am also in a network of Rethink Security network in Germany. And in this network, this was built by the Protestant Church in Germany, and with a lot of different peace groups, and also IPPNW is in that. And this group wants to make with our help and with our support from IPPNW Germany, an event next year on common security and the role of nuclear weapons. So this can be joined with the somehow, ideally, with the efforts that IPP does for the next year with Olaf Palme Institute. I think it was in April or May, as Tudor said it. So I think I'm really very happy about our group, and I see a lot of synergy effects so far, getting to know each other and to give support to each other in actions, in educational work, in networking. So this is gives me a lot of hopes for the future.
Thank you, Angelika. And this was the best summary I think you could make at the end. When there are no hands to the comments of Angelika, or what Angelika was saying, I personally would like to jump to the point of activities of the year 2022. And I will, in the beginning, only shortly summarize the main actions which we have on the agenda next year. And maybe then we can discuss them in mind. I think it starts with January, the NPT conference in New York, January 4th to January 28th. The problem of the NPT conference is that up to now, the civil society is excluded. It is also only a meeting of the leading politicians and mainly the ambassadors of the different countries at the United Nations. IPB was writing a letter to the General Secretary of the United Nations protesting against excluding the civil society from this event. I think this is not possible. And we are in discussion with our US friends in the minimum have 1 or 2 events related to this NPT conference online. This is first event. Second event is, and this is mentioned several times, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. What is interesting for us is the day before, ICANN will organize 2 events. One is the meeting with parliamentarians. I think Angelika, as a PNW, can say more details. And also there is a training meeting for activists, how to get more countries or more governments into the boat supporting the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. IPB is organizing together with our Austrian colleagues and the Austrian trade unions a public event on Sunday night in the Technical University of Vienna with a little broader topic: nuclear weapons, nuclear strategies, spending of military money for military purposes, and Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, with 3 or 4 really famous speakers. That is a little bit the agenda, our elements of the agenda up to now. Then we have next year, for the Germans, I have to say it because I think we should also internationalize these events. We have the Easter marches, where we definitely would like to invite our colleagues from the neighbor countries, Belgium, Dutch, France, Luxembourg, and also Great Britain, to be a part of it and to join us as speakers. And then we have the NATO summit. I will not speak about NATO in general because, you know, this is not our topic, but nuclear weapons are a main part of the NATO work. And I think we should be definitely engaged in the activities about nuclear weapons and NATO. I think all of you were following the last NATO summit with these very concerning words of Stoltenberg and some others about the first use of nuclear weapons. And this summit will be in June, 24th to the 26th of June in Madrid. And definitely our NATO critical organization will organize a counter summit and I think also demonstrations in Madrid. But there's another event which is connected to peace and environment. We will have at the end of June the 50 years anniversary of the first UN conference on environment. And there will be a lot of big events in Sweden. And we were suggesting in the preparatory committee in Sweden that we want to have 1 or 2 events to the question of environment and peace and environment and nuclear weapons. And the first reaction of the preparatory conference where IPB is a member of was very positive. So maybe we will also have, and this is a little bit connected to what Angelika was saying, the engagement of our colleagues in the northern European countries, some more activities in that topic at that conference, which will definitely be a quite public event. And finally, I think I will come back and take the words from Ludo and say, I think we should try to arrange it, if it will be a month of actions or a week of actions or 10 days of actions around the 26th of September as a common activity of our network in the following up of this year. We should do this again next year. These are, from my understanding, some elements. I think these should be combined with more educational webinars, but also webinars where we include parliamentarians and politicians. And I'm very thankful to Angelika that she tries to start developing a webinar, including parliamentarians from East and Central European countries, knowing this is absolutely not easy, but I think we should try to do it. These are some words from my side for the activities of next year. Hopefully we can combine this with the ongoing process of the social media work. We had a discussion with Julie that they will try working for us in the beginning of the next year again for 2 or 3 months. And we have also to see, and that is my final word, that we again find or have to look for some financial support for our No Nukes network. This is also very important. So that are some words from my point of view for the discussion about future activities and actions. And the floor is open and I'm looking for your hands.
Right now we have
I see many
Ludo,
hands.
Alain, and then Tom in that order.
So I will start with Alain, then Ludo, and then Tom. Alain, the floor is to you.
I want to come back to NPT. It's clear civil society will be excluded. It will be difficult to make events, but we have an information work to do because we have now open violations of the NPT by our states. It's not very new. The modernization of nuclear weapons was already a violation of the treaty, but the nuclear powers, they could argue with their own interpretation of the treaty and with the argument that they only maintain their armament level. But now we have open violations, as I say, and the countries, the nuclear power assumes the illegality of the actions. First nuclear sharing, Marion spoke about it. When German, Belgian, Dutch pilots are conducting NATO planes with nuclear weapons, it's clearly a violation. And the second open violation is AUKUS, the nuclear military technology for Australia, and there is violation of the Treaty of Tango about the nuclear free zone. And I think we have an information work to do on this violation, on this illegality for the NPT, because, and we have to ask the governments with our parliamentarians, and how can they justify this violation.
Thank you, Alain. I think I will come back to this later. Lulu, you are the next.
Yeah, it was related to also what I had. I think it's very crucial to have more countries next to Norway, NATO countries, I mean, as an observer, because this would be de facto, because it's in the governmental declaration to the meeting of state parties, is already kind of breaking the cohesion on NATO's policy of attacking TPNW and spreading disinformation on it. My thing is, so hopefully there will be followed like Germany, and I don't know if there's more news on that, and maybe Belgium. I'm in touch with some parliamentarians, so they also from governmental side, so they try to push inside to have Belgium also as an observer. Some countries, so Norway, then Sweden, Finland, Switzerland. Yeah, we know from Ireland and Austria, of course, that there will be at the meeting of state parties. Would be good to have a kind of overview on why, or a small thing we can use for advocacy in our proper countries. So I could very much use it to convince those in government, the Greens and Social Democrats in Belgium, for example, to use this, because this is really convincing, because they say always we need other countries to be an observer. So and then this is the case already with European Union members and maybe some NATO members.
Tom, the floor is to you. And Alain, can you put your hand down, or do you raise your hand again? Otherwise you are...
Okay, I'll try and get through this quickly whilst he has a bottle in his mouth. I strongly support what Alan said about the NPT process. The CND has been collecting signatures from residents in the UK, but more widely, as part of the process of reporting the UK to the NPT. And we have a meeting in early December with the Argentinian ambassador, who's the president of the NPT conference, where we'll officially hand over these signatories. There's an international version, so for non-UK citizens to report the UK's breach. And I think we should all circulate that within our organisations if we haven't done so already. So I'll make sure that that's sent out. So at the very least, the Nuke for Europe social media accounts can circulate the international statement, and individual organisations as well. Really, I mean, that the president of the NPT is meeting us. They know it's a breach of the NPT. I mean, the German foreign secretary has said that it's clearly a breach. Everybody knows it's a breach of the NPT, the British government. So let's really push this. The other thing I want to raise, you may not have heard when I said it earlier, is that COP26 is happening next week. I think it's really important that we try as best we can to kind of merge the concerns of the environmental movement and the peace movement. The CND will have a big presence at the COP demonstrations in Glasgow, but also they're happening across the UK. I think as a minimum, kind of in terms of our social media work on this, there should be a very basic Nuke-free Europe statement saying our concerns are the same. We can do some social media stuff and tag it in to the COP26 stuff, just so, because there'll be a lot of social media activity around COP26 and it will at the very least get picked up. But the other thing I want to raise that I spoke about earlier, which people may have missed, is probably more complicated, but it's in terms of the TPNW States Parties Conference. So I have all sorts of, issues with the TPNW in terms of kind of, how it becomes a norm and, how it will contribute towards the abolition of nuclear weapons. But it's clear to me that at least within, there are some aspects of the TPNW which state parties have signed up to, which can become operational political issues now. And one of those is the legacy of testing. So I would, in terms of a European-wide movement, how do we make the most out of that? Well, there are the issues of British nuclear testing. There's the issues of French nuclear testing. There's the issue of the legacy of nuclear testing for the US bombs, which are based on European soil. And there are 2 European states which have signed up to the TPNW. How do we kind of, how does the peace movement on a European scale interact with the state parties who have an express political commitment to doing something about these questions? So that, I think perhaps we need a further discussion about this, but I think if we're going to go to the TPNW States Parties Conference, yes, let's meet, yes, let's discuss more, but this is a big, important thing. There'll be state representation from across the world. What more can we say in addition to simply meeting and repeating kind of what we know already about how bad nuclear weapons are? There are bits in the TPNW that you can put into action. And I'd like to see us try and do that if at all possible.
Thank you, Tom. Are there further comments? Okay. When there are no further comments, I really would like to divide a little bit our responsibility. And maybe, first of all, I start with COP26. And I think, I hope, Tom, you heard that Angelika will also join COP26. So hopefully you can meet and have some common discussion and also join some events together. But Tom, can I ask you to develop a short draft or a statement for our Nukes network, which you can distribute in Glasgow, which we can put on our website, about this relation between peace and climate, above also nuclear weapons and climate?
Yeah. Angelika, can you and I do that together?
Yes, we can work together on that. IPPNW has made up a declaration on nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. I can send that around, and then we have 2 leaflets in English, one on military and peace. Nice leaflet, and one on that nuclear energy cannot save the climate, and there's a short paragraph in it also because of the proliferation.
I'm thinking, Angelika, sort of headline, we have 2 existential threats, the sort of thing that can be put out on social media that chimes in with, the
I have made
that chimes
up presentations on that, and I can send you a picture with the 2 main threads. It's written in German, but it's easy to. I'll put that in English, and then I have that for you.
Okay. Well, let's communicate in the next couple of days. Yeah.
Okay. So
maybe one word to that. I'd like to a long article on relations on climate change and peace and with nuclear weapons, but also the fighter jets that are also used, of course, to transport the nuclear bombs. So maybe I can contribute to once you have first.
So thank you, first of all, to Tom and Angelika for taking the lead. And then definitely the steering committee will be included and add their points. And then hopefully we'll have a quite nice statement, hopefully before the Glasgow event happened. So thank you so much for doing that. The same is to Alain. Alain, I would like to ask you to get in contact to discuss about the violation and the legal aspects with Lucas and the International IALANA. Maybe you can come to an idea how we can present these violations at the NPT conference, either on a webinar or on a paper or whatever, so that we also have a good paper or document about these violations, which you mentioned, or Tom mentioned, also Ludo mentioned, that we could put together all these violations of the NPT by the nuclear weapons and the nuclear sharing countries. That is the second point. Great. You know, there it was in the chat the question of, Marion, I saw you, the question of Germany and observer. I have not discussed this with Angelika. Maybe she will protest what I'm saying now. I am very much in doubt that Germany will be an observer. We had today the new development of the drones were quite difficult. Maybe I'm too pessimistic, but I think I know the political scenario in Berlin and its surroundings quite well. Hopefully I'm wrong, but please have in mind that I think the train is going in the wrong direction. Okay, Marion is the next.
Okay, so Rainer, I hope you're wrong, because our campaign believes that it is the pressure of the peace movement which makes it possible, or even got some parties to promise that they're going to send an observation person. So we will see. Anyway, I was wondering whether any organization or maybe IPPNW has looked into, I mean, since we were having 2,000 nuclear tests in the past and 500 of them were atmospheric tests, they must have had released an enormous amount of heat. I mean, every bomb is millions of degrees which they release during the chain reaction. Whether there's a calculation somewhere that we even could show how much nuclear production and testing is responsible or is part of the problem of climate change, and to bring this also in as an argument that we don't need more nuclear weapons and definitely no use of them.
May I answer directly?
Please.
There is no, I don't know any study which is has done a calculation of the effects of climate change of the nuclear testing. We have only several work studies on the health effects of nuclear testing in the different countries and what is has been observed there or geschätzt. Ich weiß nicht, das Wort geschätzt. Estimated, yeah.
Estimated.
Was estimated about them, but I can ask our friends in the United States, because they all did these climate studies on nuclear weapons, if there is any estimation on that. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Marion, I think you still raised your hand. Okay. Okay, so.
I think Ludo wanted to speak.
Who?
Ludo?
No,
Oh,
no,
Ludo.
no, 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 no,
Okay.
not.
You unmuted yourself. I thought you wanted to speak.
No, no.
Okay, so I can't see any more hands. Then I would like to say, I think it was an interesting meeting. We got a lot of facts, arguments, and also a perspective for next year. I think we have a short-term work to do. That is the preparation of the statement. This is the preparation of January NPT conference in New York. I will update you when we have our discussion with our US colleagues in the beginning of next week. What are our ideas for some online webinars or events during the NPT conference? And I think we all have to think a little bit more in detail about our activities in Vienna. We have to see what is ICANN really developing. It was a little bit unclear. I had a longer discussion with Beatrice in Barcelona about their plans, and they were very abstract at that time. So hopefully they will concretize their plans in the next weeks, and then we can see if there is open space and what we can really do. There are a lot of suggestions on the table what we can do. I'm very much in favor of the testing ideas from Tom. I think it is worthwhile to follow up of these ideas and to bring them to Vienna. We have to think how we can do it. And then we have to definitely start in the beginning of next year also with the plans for our common actions. I think we should start much earlier with the plans for the September than we have done it last year, so that they can become bigger and maybe a little bit more engaged, more countries, having maybe also Italy a bit more intensive on board. So that are some points for the next year. I wish you, all of you, when there are no further comments, a nice evening, great time, enjoy the autumn. And I think we will have one more steering committee meeting before the end of the year, and bye-bye. Bye. So all the best and bye-bye, and see you soon, and all the best to you at the COP26. I think you need your help and support.